Hi, I'm Darlene Carman.
And I'm Doug Carman.
And welcome to the show. We are pleased to have Stephanie Metz, one of this year's Artist Laureates, selected by Silicon Valley Creates. Her felted wool sculpture scores for the off-the-wall category. We have asked her to show us a little how she does needle felting. She promises to share a few of her innovative techniques that she's developed to put a stamp on the art form. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're a laureate.
Thank
How does
you.
that feel now?
Oh, it feels wonderful. When you look at the group of people who have been chosen as laureates in the past, it is a heady group. It's a who's who of professionals of amazing creativity in our region. So I'm just really proud to be counted among them. And even this year, one of the other laureates, Victoria May, is one of my favorite artists, and I love that I get to rub elbows with her, and it feels really good. It's great company to be in. And as an artist, you do a lot of working alone, which is also good for me. I enjoy that. But it's really good to be more part of the community and recognized by the community of people whose work you admire too. So it's been
And it's
really
nice
wonderful.
to get a little bit of money.
On a practical
no
note, it's
strings
helping
attached.
pay
Just-
the rent for my studio this year, which is really, really wonderful. I mean, it's practical and wonderful altogether.
Is this the first time you've ever received like a huge award? I know you're award-winning artist, but I mean, this is a huge award.
This is definitely a big deal. Also, a number of years ago, I received a Bell Foundation grant, which is another local regional grant-making group, which just out of the blue, I mean, you're nominated and you don't know anything about it. And so I received a letter in the mail that I had been recognized, and here's some money, and that was also just wonderful. It's nice to know there
I
are
want one of those
little
letters.
angels looking over your shoulder, and
Wow.
it just feels really good.
Well, you started out working traditional material like clay and metal and stone, but once you hit on felt, that seemed to be it for you. What is it about wool that you're attracted to?
Well, so I've always been interested in biology, and so I was doing a lot of figurative studies in college in other traditional materials. And then when I came across the wool, it was totally on a whim. I wasn't thinking of it as real art. And I wanted to try doing wet felting, which is what people are maybe more familiar with. Dunking, put your favorite wool sweater in the wash. It's tiny and dense. That's wet felting. So I went to a yarn store to get some materials, and the woman there immediately directed me away from wet felting to needle felting and showed me this little book. And it turns out you could have an amazing degree of control over it, and you can make all sorts of different forms. And it was a pretty open realm to explore, because a lot of what's already out there is, kind of cutesy and craftsy and toadstools and fairies, and that's not really my aesthetic. I started going off in all sorts of different directions. And basically felted wool is taking soft, fluffy wool and mechanically compressing and compacting it, as I'll show you a little bit later, using very specialized tools that come from industry. So this is a felting needle in a holder to work with it by hand. It's very sharp and it's notched in one direction. And so when you poke this into the wool, it's forcing the fibers together. And the wool fibers are like human hair. If you see a shampoo commercial that shows all those overlapping scales, it's those scales that are getting interlocked, for the same reason that hair dreadlocks. So basically, I'm matting hair together.
Wait. Now, let's see. That's because of these...
The notches, the barbs along the edges. They're
And
forcing and
can't
pushing the
see it.
fibers. No, you can feel them, but you can't see
feel
them.
it
And
if
it's
you
very sharp. You
gently.
can feel that, too.
Careful now.
Oh, it is another
Waiting for his
cut.
drama.
Try not to leave DNA on your work by drawing blood if you can avoid
Oh
it.
man, and the wool, of course, is this natural wool?
Yeah, it's just been
or
washed
not
and brushed. It's-
Synthetic.
No. It wouldn't work if it were synthetic, because it has to have those little overlapping scales. So I started experimenting with it, and it just happens to be my nature that I keep playing with things and pushing it and seeing what I can do with it. And it took me on a real journey. I started off with very traditional subject matter. So I was doing, replicating the human form, trying to make the wool basically look like all these other things like marble or bronze, or trying to make it look like these traditional hard materials. And then eventually I came around to really embracing it being soft and organic and really playing with that.
Accepting it for what it was.
Exactly, not trying to make it be something else. And I think part of that is my background in more traditional things that are hard and noble materials. And now I consider wool to be a noble material, but I had to convince myself too.
So, do you ever go back and work with clay or anything?
A little bit. But this is so responsive. It's such, it's a lot of repetitive poking, and yet you have so much control over it. And you're not making something where you then have to make a mold and then make another positive. It's just a direct thing. And then, you know, a finished piece is soft and has a little bit of give to it, but I'm doing a lot of representing organic forms, and I'm using an organic material to do it. So it feels kind of warm and tantalizingly touchable. And I love that about it. It's just really started to feed into what I do with the work.
Plus, it's a lot lighter than a piece of marble.
Shipping it is wonderful. It doesn't break, doesn't weigh hardly anything.
Yeah. You don't have to worry when you drop it. Boom, there goes your piece.
Yeah.
All over the
I'm
floor.
so glad I work in this material. I just had to ship some work to the Netherlands, and that's a long way to ship things, but if they're nice and light and not breakable, it just makes your life a lot easier.
Yeah, that's expensive.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm noticing, you know, you have a lot of things like this. You seem, and you'd mentioned that you like biology. You really seem to have an aptitude for it.
Well, ever since
because you have a lot of animals, I noticed in your work.
Well,
where does that come from?
I've always loved animals. I've always drawn them. And then I have so many memories of going to the California Academy of Sciences, the Natural History Museum in Golden Gate Park as a child, all throughout my childhood. And now I take my kids there. And while they've reconfigured it quite a bit since then in really good ways, there's still, you know, bits and pieces from when I was a child.
I haven't been there since they remodeled it, so that's been actually years ago.
It's amazing.
But they had, I do remember, and I do remember another guest that we had that would use the rooms, and I guess they have drawers and drawers
and drawers.
you
can go and use some of their research materials. It's amazing.
Certain times, do they let you, I mean, how do you do that? How do you
You
work
just have to contact them, and they have different, there's a room that is open to the public, and then if you're an artist, you can also contact them and go behind the scenes and work from their laboratories.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And so did you actually work with them or do anything for them?
Very early in the making things out of wool, I wanted to make a sheep skull out of a sheep's wool to see if I could make those rigid, hard, like make the wool look really hard. And at the time, that was about 12 years ago, they had a skulls exhibit at the Academy of Sciences. So I went there to draw from a skull. And so that kind of, you know, that felt right at home. And then more recently, I've been making all these kind of pseudo-natural specimens, and I was making a wet specimen, which is, as opposed to, you know, bones or fossils or something like that, a wet specimen would be the whole creature in alcohol to preserve it. And I was making a piece, and I had to ship it down to Los Angeles. I didn't know what liquid to use because I couldn't ship formaldehyde, and I contacted them, and they said, oh, you can just use rubbing alcohol of the kind that you would buy at the grocery store. And by the way, you make teddy bear skulls. Why not come and demonstrate at our Thursday night exhibit, because they remounted the skulls exhibit. So I got to go show the making of these teddy bear skulls, which clearly skulls don't normally have ears, but you know, sometimes it requires it. And I really
gruesome.
That's one way to look at it. I mean, this is a wet specimen of a little unicorn.
But this is not the same thing as when you were talking about a wet felt.
This is felted. This piece inside is something I felted, and then I put in a jar, and I put rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol.
Because you were talking about wet felting. That's different.
No, yes.
I'm not familiar with
this is just putting making a wet specimen.
I really need to see how this works. Let's
show you.
See how this works.
All right.
I had a big question.
Time to see how it works, Doug.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I have a number of different tools here to use. Basically, I'm using the felting needle, but I have several different holders that allow me to use more than one needle at once. So
you don't want to get your hair caught into the work.
No.
Because
I was going to ask you. Pull that back so you don't felt your hair.
Not as bad as poking yourself, but still not good. So I start with a loose, fluffy wool, and I make sure my fingers are not in the way. I'm working over a surface that's a brush mat. It's basically like an upside-down scrub brush, because that suspends the wool over the surface and doesn't allow me to stab at the table and break off needles. And I'm just starting to poke and poke and poke straight into and through the material, and you can see I keep turning it over and kind of pushing down the high points.
So the brush allows you to go all the way through, make a complete,
Exactly.
and you don't have a hard surface.
Yes.
That
Another
impedes your-
alternative would be
Yeah.
foam rubber, but that kind of is a little
could
bit
tear that
squishy.
up after a
Yeah,
while.
this is just a little bit more satisfying. So I'm just using the needles to poke and compress in towards the center. So if I wanted to make a sphere, I would be evenly turning and poking in from all sides. If
and
I wanted,
eventually make a ball.
it gets more and more dense. I mean, I can give you an idea of how dense this could be just by holding it very tightly in my hands. So it's getting increasingly dense and compact. If I want to make like...
Well, wait, now, you can't cheat, though? You can't sit there and squeeze it and push it? What happens
It's
when
not
you
going to
do
hold
that?
together.
I'm not going to do anything.
Yeah,
I'm
it'll just
mechanically
spring back
tangling the
out.
fibers. So you can see I've made kind of a long skinny thing, and that has to do with how I turn the material and the
Shape
parts
it,
that I
to
poke
shape
into.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have
And
to
it
shape
seems
it.
fairly coarse, and it might seem like it takes a long time. It takes some time.
It is. I
But,
can see it's time.
I mean, here's an example.
Time-consuming.
Yeah, this is a lot more dense and compact. I forced more material in. And on this one, you can kind of see there's sort of folds of
Yes.
flesh.
Yeah.
And I do that by a combination of things. This is both additive and subtractive. Additive in that you're always adding more wool on, subtractive in that you're poking and pressing it down. So for example, for these folds of flesh, I will emphasize the space in between the folds by poking in a line, and that's pushing it all down. And then I will also add more on in between. So I can add little bits of it on. And whenever I'm doing small details, I'll do a single needle because I can control it better and I can poke it in more deeply. So I can be building up the form in between, right onto what I'm working on. Or I can make a little separate piece. So I'm going to make a little separate fold of flesh, make it...
Put 'em together.
Put them together. And
Like this.
joining things is as simple as poking through one and into the other. So I can start making that really adhere and meld onto it.
How old is the art of felting?
Felting
is that
goes,
the-
wet felting goes back centuries, but using this
is that
tool...
the right term?
Yeah,
Felting?
felting. This tool was developed during the Industrial Revolution to make sheets of felt in factories. They'd have hundreds of these needles coming down and poking,
So that's where you
poking.
get that fine, like for felt
Exactly.
hats and stuff.
Exactly, yeah. And wet felting has been around way longer. But using it by hand is only about 20 years old with these tools. So here's an example of if I were, have this little human figure and I'm going to add an arm on. Whenever I'm making all these very complex things, I break it down into the component parts, complete those as much as I can, and then add them together. So this is not quite like that because it's not totally done. But I just hold the little shoulder in place and I start poking through it. And I'm basically using the needle to catch the fibers in the shoulder and forcing them into the body. And then I'll add a little bit more on to keep
No
melding
bind
around it.
together.
No
Yeah.
sewing, no gluing.
No. And at this stage, I could reposition it if I want to swing the arm this way or that way. I could also still take it off again. And you can kind of see when I start to pull it off, the
see
fibers
how
binding
sticking,
it.
yeah,
Right, but
sticking.
this one's not coming off just by pulling because
No,
it's
not
on
at
more
all.
firmly. And in fact, this one is even further along where it's even more dense and compact. I can hold it up by its little ankle and it
Wow.
can stand.
And you're getting the muscle
The
definition
detail, yeah,
more
like
defined.
the flowing of cloth. Now, another thing I sort of figured out was that if I need an armature in something like this, I can get it to near completion, and then I can slice into the leg and put a wire in there and kind of close it up again, and then put that wire down into a base.
Oh.
So it's been a lot of making things up as I go, depending on what I need. Because the
Very
first figure,
sounds
yeah,
versatile.
exactly. And
You
the
have
first figure I tried to make with a wire inside of it, and I kept coming too close to the wire and snapping the needle off. So that's how I, learn by trial and error and learn by doing.
Yeah, well, that's how you learn the whole craft, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
You-
And maybe
you didn't go
reinventing the
online.
wheel. Right.
You didn't go online, because I know a lot of people are doing that now.
Yeah.
They go online to learn a craft or learn music, but you did not.
No.
You
In
got
fact,
the
I
book.
avoided the textiles department in college completely, so I'm probably reinventing the wheel when it comes to fiber altogether, but it seems to serve me well because what I love about this is experimenting with it.
Oh, yeah.
So this is one of the teddy bear skulls. Again, component parts. I would make the different, like the zygomatic bones and then add them on. Obviously, skulls don't normally have ears, but I would add those on too. And then I would do kind of a smooth coat over all of it so that you can't even tell what was added where. And if I want to change something, I mean, if this leg is too short, I could take sharp scissors, cut it off, add a plug more in there and add it back together again, and you'll never be able to tell. So it's really
So
forgiving.
to make it smooth, like that's very, very smooth, is it more of the process of what you're doing, or
Yes.
do you do something else
No,
to
no,
it?
it's just more, it's time. It's time and effort. Basically poking very shallowly and doing very smooth overlapping layers. So just people say that one of the things that's different about the way I treat the wool when I'm needle felting is that it looks smoother and tighter, and that's because
Yes, it
I
does.
spend more time to make it more dense, because then it can show more detail and look smoother.
So now
kind
you
of time.
said that this is a very forgiving medium.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that you have a shape going? Can you change the shape?
Totally, yeah.
How? I mean, how would you do that?
You can cut things off, you can add things on, you can keep making it up as you go. And because there's no, I mean, this especially, there's no armature in it, so cutting it apart and changing it is not a problem.
You don't have to wet it or
No,
change
I don't
anything
use
to start.
water at all. No, I'm just using the mechanical technique.
Just doing that.
What's the advantage of the water? You know, the wet
There's no
felting.
advantage.
There's no
No,
advantage.
no. It's just a whole different art form that I don't really do. I love this. I
You
love
love-
the
Yeah.
control that I get
Yeah.
because I work so three-dimensionally.
Well-
But do you want me to show you how I do two-dimensional work with the wool as well? With the drawing and
Well,
wool?
that's what
yeah.
I was going to ask
Yeah.
you, because the drawing is your own technique, kind of your own invention. And I was wondering, how do you use it in your work? And well,
This
I'd
is
like to
something
see
nobody
some.
else has ever
Right.
done before.
Yeah.
huh?
Well, when
is
you're
your own
using wool
invention.
all the time, maybe you decide that you should try drawing with it. So this came about, just again, more experimentation. This is a technique where I am drawing with wool, and it's another branch of what I do, but it's a more two-dimensional branch. Where, for example, I've started
that's
by.
just-
Maybe we can hold
drawing.
it up.
So I've drawn this jackrabbit on tracing paper, and I'm
Hold
laying
still.
it over a piece of kind of thick printmaking paper. So it's got a high cotton content, so that so I can kind of pierce through. You can feel it's got some real structure to it.
Yeah,
And
okay.
then I'll go through and take just a regular old pin that I made a handle for, and I'll punch through and make an outline for myself, so that when I remove the tracing paper, I have just a really faint outline, and then
Hold up,
of
hold up.
tiny little holes.
Little holes.
It'd be
You might
pretty
not even be able to
hard
see
to
it.
see, but
Yeah.
there's a bunch of little holes all the way
That
around.
outline the rabbit.
Exactly. And then in this case, I'm using a black wool, and I'm just grabbing bits of it and forcing it through the paper. And this is
wow.
mounted over top of a piece of foam that kind of receives it in the back. And I start drawing with it by laying the fiber in place and making it thicker and darker in some places
Wow.
and lighter in others. This is a really brief introduction. Let me show you this a little bit further on. So this is the
Wow.
same rabbit further on.
Oh my
So I'm
goodness.
plunging the needle through
Ooh.
to establish where I want this to be. And I can get, I mean, it's all about values. I can do a lot of dark and light just depending on how thickly I apply the wool.
You know, just
Now,
shadow
is
and
this
depth.
used in your work? This is a whole different thing.
This is just
right?
another branch of how I make work. I mean, this is, I mean, I'm still using wool, but it's a very different way. I mean, it's a
Now,
two-dimensional
you
way
have
of
a lot
depicting the
of
world.
YouTube demonstrations on there. Do you have the wool yet, or you haven't done that yet?
I don't have the wool drawing on there yet, but I think I need to do that.
Well,
I do
you
have.
can do some of that here.
Exactly.
I mean, put it on YouTube.
Exactly.
How long have you been doing the wool drawing? Is this a fairly recent
No, probably
departure from your normal?
About 2 or 3 years now. And I love it because it's just another way, another means of expression, and I love that from far away.
Is it a
kinda
little
looks,
faster than
It
the
is. It's a little faster, and honestly, for people who want to collect my work, it's a more like a way for them to kind of an entry level thing for them to experience.
And they
some of
can
my
hang
art.
it on the wall.
Exactly.
rather, yeah,
That helps too because it's hard to find space in your home and in your life for sculpture
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well, now, how finished do you get with this? In other words, a lot of the rabbit looks finished.
Right.
Is it finished?
No, it's not. I'm going to kind of fill in the different parts
Yes.
here.
Well, of course, but I
right.
mean, as far as the shading and the colorings, is that what you're looking for?
Yes.
Can you ever like change colors? Could you add, like, if you wanted pink?
I could.
in the ears.
Yes.
Could you do that?
I tend to just like the, I mean, in both the
Yeah.
three-dimensional and two-dimensional work, I prefer just the single color, so it's
Yeah.
more about form.
Yeah.
I have some framed ones as well over here.
Oh, nice.
So when I peel these up off of the background, the back of them, it kind of looks like grass coming out. So, I mean, it's very three-dimensional, so I frame them in deep shadow box frames, so it gives it a little bit of space.
Yeah, can they get a
Wow.
good shot of this?
That's the front
So
side.
that's another kind of experimenting that I'm doing. And then now I'm also really starting back to the three-dimensional work. The direction I'm going is much larger. So I'm doing a lot of experimenting in a different way with that now too. I already mentioned that these tools are used for making sheets of industrial felt. I've started using industrial felt to kind of make some armatures to try to go bigger. So here's just a little piece. The gray is industrial felt. Here I've taken a little circle and a little piece, and I've joined them together simply by pushing the wool, the white wool, through them to make them join together.
So a piece of commercially processed wool or felt, then you can take and build onto it or add to it. Yeah.
So let me show you an example of what I'm doing there. Because I'm trying to work larger, that would be a lot of poking.
Well, you know what? We have some
scale up.
pictures. Why don't we take a look at some of the beautiful artwork that you have hanging in some of the gallery?
Yes, I have a nice installation
And
view of some really large
It would give an
pieces.
idea of
These are the large ones.
what you're striving to do, because you're already doing it.
Right, yeah.
In fact, you don't have any here now because it's all
I have,
in the gallery.
I have 3 pieces
Here we
in
go.
the
What are we
Netherlands.
looking at here?
Yes, so that's an installation view of some of my very large pieces. These are, I call these my flesh and bone pieces. They're sort of a combination of the hardest parts and soft parts of bodies in a very abstract way, where it's not directly a translation from life, but it's suggestive of different things.
How big is that one that's closest to us on the right?
That's 3 feet wide by about 2.5 feet deep by another 3 feet.
Wow.
So it's really large. And the reason I'm going in this direction is I love these really large pieces because it makes the audience have to kind of move around them and in between them to experience them, and hopefully to identify and think about the movement of their own body as they're crouching down to look at things and walking among them. The next one will show another view. So this is actually props of my husband and son peering through one of them to kind of give a sense of human body size. Right.
Little humor there.
Exactly.
But that's good.
So I'm really enjoying working
And
really
this one
large,
is-
and that's another installation view. So I'm doing some smaller
What is
pieces.
that object that's on the right?
That's just a small study for a larger piece that I planned. That's about 14 inches tall.
14 inches tall, huh? That's
So,
nice.
so instead of just building up by adding more and more wool on, as I go larger like this, I'm working kind of from the outside in, like making a skin. So, for example, making smaller maquettes so that I can scale them up to larger ones. So I've been teaching myself pattern making. This is a piece of styrofoam that I carved into this kind of abstract form. And then I took regular old craft felt and started making a pattern to figure out, okay, what's the translation between a 3-dimensional form and what flat shapes would it take to make that? So I kind of had to, and I got some lessons from Victoria May, the other artist who I love, who does a lot of patterning kind of things. So it turns out this is the shape it takes to make this. So then I tried translating it into the thicker industrial felt.
So you can take and make a pattern.
Exactly.
From
So I
the
wanted to see, I mean, this is just an empty hollow form made of the industrial felt, and it already kind of holds its form. So now I know that I can scale up that pattern and thus scale up the whole thing. And one way that I
So that could be 5 foot by 6 foot.
Exactly.
Yeah, and go as big as you want now.
Here's a slightly bigger
nice.
one even. So this is
Wow.
a piece in process. This will be a
Wow.
hanging piece. Again, it's
Oh,
an
nice.
abstract kind of bone kind of one. You can kind of see down here where I'm starting to cover it with the wool because I can still make it white.
Sure.
Because this is industrial felt, I could poke into and through it. But the other fun thing that I am discovering is to fill it up. What I've done is in this one, I have sprayed some, I don't know if you can see it, there's spray expanding foam like you would find at a hardware store.
cool.
So that expands
yeah.
into the shape to kind of balloon it up, but then it's also something where I can pierce into and through it with the felting needles. So I can keep covering over this. So it's very, I mean, it's very strange and different, and this one's very unfinished. But it gives a good idea of how I can go really large with these. And so it's just more experimenting and seeing what direction I can go in. And
Wow.
it's totally an untrod path. I can just make it up as I like. And
Do you have
know,
any upcoming shows?
I have a show right now at the Triton Museum in Santa Clara. 2 of my really large pieces, as well as some of my clothing pieces that incorporate
And it's
wool.
there for how long?
Through July the 12th.
July the
So
12th.
another almost 2
At the
months.
Triton?
Yes, and then I
Okay.
have some work at the Rijswijk Textile Biennial in the Netherlands. Another 2 very large pieces there for
Well,
about
that might
another
be
month.
a little hard for.
It's a little farther. It's a little farther. And then I have other pieces. I have about 18 pieces in 2 different shows touring Europe right now too. So
How
one through the
nice.
Netherlands and one through the UK. So
Do you
I have a lot.
do you have any classes or
I
anything?
do
Yeah,
actually.
workshops?
Yes, I'm going to be teaching in a few weeks at Cabrillo College in Aptos. It's going to be a 4-day class, 2 consecutive weekends, and then I'm teaching at Aeromont School of Arts and Crafts in Tennessee later on in the summer for a whole week.
Wow,
Yeah.
how exciting is
Yeah,
that?
it's great. It's so fun because it's a really nice way to meet kindred spirits, and I just get so excited sharing what I know because, I mean, this is what I think about a lot, and there's just a lot to tell and a lot to share. So it's always really fun to meet the people that want to do it. And
I like the direction that you're going,
Thanks.
large. I think that really works well for installations.
Yes.
And I did see some of your work online, and you can see what was the hanging. What was those things?
yeah, the
Those-
kind of pot. I mean, they're all a little abstract. But I have a YouTube video of making one of my teddy skulls in time lapse, so you don't have to sit there for as long as it takes. And I'm
So you
trying to
can-
do more filming of pieces so that because that's a good way to reach people too.
You know, they say people when they do their art that it says something about them. So what would you say that your art says about you?
I think it would say that I'm really interested in experimentation and play, and that I'm very influenced by the natural world and the unnatural aspects of it that I see.
I would say, and I see the humor there.
Yes, that
definitely,
too.
Definitely have a sense of humor. And I just think that like this time next year, you're probably going to be just bigger and bigger. I just have a feeling you're
I
going
hope
to
so.
go bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like, you know. And what about any upcoming shows now? You have Triton. Do you have anything beyond that?
Nothing locally beyond that yet for a while. There's going to be another one also in Tennessee, but that's going to be later on in October. So nothing local right now, but things keep coming up. So
It'll be
we'll
coming
see.
up, so
Yep.
people check your website.
A lot of my work is already out in the world, so I need to have some of it come back so that I can send
So
it out
yeah,
again.
your website's very easy to go to.
Yes.
It's your name.
Yeah.
It's just my name, Stephanie Metz.
Well, I want to thank you
Stephanie
so
Metz.
much for being here.
Thank you
and
so
people out
much.
there watching the show, now you know what to do with all that pet hair that you gather here and there. Now you know what you can do with it. So thanks for watching the show, and watch again.
Thank you.
Well, you know, you can use hair, right?
You can, yes.
But you have to do something to it.